You said the A word. Attribution is such a mess. And the challenge is everyone tries to force it into kind of the last click, the last touch box. Everyone wants credit. And I think that's a problem. I think all the tools out there do a poor job. Do a poor job actually measuring what's happening in the marketplace.
This is the Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Join me as I uncover the secrets of the world's most elite CMOs and marketing leaders. Hello and welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Revenue Driven CMO. I am your main man, Chris Mechanic, here with a very exciting guest that I'm beyond excited to be speaking with. He's a global executive marketing leader known for driving consistent double-digit growth through a powerful combination of like strategic brand storytelling, and very high converting, demand gen and bottom funnel type messages. And his impressive track record includes restructuring a demand gen process at a B2B SaaS company, which resulted in a 24% increase in sales qualified leads and revitalizing brand, product, and corporate messaging to establish thought leadership and industry leadership, which ultimately laid the groundwork for a really nice acquisition and an exit. He's got extensive experience scaling B2B SaaS companies, like especially in that 20 million to even over 50 million range. And he's spearheaded the growth of a global division of an education company from 100 million to 350 million and beyond. Currently, he is CMO at Ceipal, which is a really interesting company in the talent and staffing space that I'm excited to dig into. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Andy Weiss. How are you, Andy?
Thanks, Chris. Doing well. Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too, man. And excited to really dig deep and dive into various topics. But we like to lead with the value, and we like to start with the biggest secrets. And we've all got them. So what would you say one of your biggest secrets to success is?
So Chris, as marketers, we either get labeled as brand marketers or demand gen marketers at some point in our career. And the longer we're in this business, the more quickly it tends to happen. And I came to the decision or asked myself the question a bunch of years ago, like, do I have to be one or the other? Because I like brand storytelling and I like the demand generation side, the bottom line kind of data driven stuff. And so I was like, you know what? I think there's kind of a crossover. And so I came up with this idea of brand gen or brand storytelling combined with that demand generation piece. And that's kind of how I started to position myself and my own personal brand before kind of leaning heavily into it. And I think as I get deeper and deeper into my career, having that balance of being a head of marketing that has that bottom line kind of how do we grow our business side of things is super important. But especially in this day and age with AI and in the B2B SaaS space, being able to, break down the barriers to product adoption and creation and stuff, there's really not a lot of barriers to entry and differentiation. So that brand storytelling piece is becoming more important. And it's kind of that moat that, we as brand marketers or B2B marketers can put around our organizations and still use that to drive growth through that demand gen piece. So brand gen is my secret.
Well, I have so many thoughts on that. And I love this topic, as you know. Let's take it back through history for a second, right? So historically, there was, I guess maybe there was direct response, but it was, the CMO was largely thought of as brand. Like the word demand gen didn't come about until whatever it was 20 years ago. So historically it was like, okay, who can come up with the best angle, the best slogans? It was like kind of brand-ish. Of course, there was the Claude Hopkins of the world and, the David Ogilvy's and like the direct response guys, um, which you could argue even they were brand gen in a way. Because like they wrote fire direct response copy, but it was long form and told a story as well. But then I think suddenly what happened was like the internet came out, right? And there was suddenly, Google ads and paid social and these things, and they were technical and, it was more of like a math brain really that would excel there. And so the CMO, suddenly people started to expect them to do both the brand storytelling and the demand gen. And the vast majority of CMOs, I think, are more like on the storytelling side. So when you bring that demand gen and that direct response into it, and you start thinking of like every single thing that you put out as having kind of two purposes, I think it can be really, really powerful, man.
Well, and I completely agree, but I would also say that there's actually one purpose. That one purpose is to grow your business. And so if you're doing that, and if you're doing it with through that lens, then the story that you're sharing at the top end of the process should be tied to kind of the other steps in that sequence. So if I'm telling you a story and building a brand, some brand awareness and some education, then I'm bringing you deeper and deeper into that process. And at some point, you're then ready to transition into the sales sequence of that. And that thread should, if done well, should continue on. And as you were kind of sharing kind of your thoughts on kind of the origin and kind of taking us back in time, I think part of my story or my tale is kind of coming of age in that transitionary period where a lot of the people that I learned, like you, I was on the agency side. So a lot of the people that I learned brand marketing and brand storytelling from were kind of came out of that Mad Men school where one of the guys actually wrote the Gatorade commercial, Be Like Mike, on a cocktail napkin at lunch, kind of that kind of story. But he wasn't the internet and direct response wasn't a thing as part of that. But that's kind of followed my trajectory in my career from the direct response and direct mail and internet pieces. And so I think that's helped kind of bring those two things together. But I think as, even at Ceipal, one of the things that we try and do is even when we're telling a story is what's the outcome? Why am I telling this? What do we want to accomplish? And that's the way that we ensure that demand gen piece is infused in the story part. And then vice versa, if we're trying to, drive more leads, more opportunities, more, sales per se, then, okay, how can we tell it in a fashion that has some narrative to it? Like yesterday I was working on a demo, and instead of just kind of showing everything that the software does, like let's chop it up a little bit. And let's, what's the story arc of this piece of functionality? And let's tell the narrative there. And then let's move on to another chapter and tell a different piece of it so that you as the prospect or the customer have a better understanding of this is how this functionality helps me do my job better, faster, smarter.
No, that's brilliant. And again, I have just so many thoughts, but so, where my mind is going right now is that a lot of companies, especially larger companies, have have these two different teams, right? Like it's your direct response, your demand gen team, and then you've got your brand, or also called sometimes corporate communications, or whatever that team is. And they are both working toward the same outcome, but they're largely siloed in many of these larger orgs. Is that, you think, a structure that's here to stay, or do you think that structure is going away?
I think it's going to evolve itself away. And the reason for that is increasingly, marketing teams have to know their numbers, have to be aligned with sales, have to be aligned with the growth of the organization. This growth at all costs is kind of, those days are gone. We have to be profitable, number one. Number two, with the influx and utilization of different forms of AI, I think it's kind of forcing some of those walls and barriers to kind of be broken down. And so at scale, maybe there's different disciplines or different roles and responsibilities, but at the end of the day, the marketing structure and organization needs to be aligned with the goals of the company at large. And so, a head of marketing, a CMO, whatever title you want to give that individual, they can set up their structure to kind of grow and scale and be efficient within those different areas, because you do need to have some level of specialization. But at the end of the day, the team, its outcomes need to be aligned with those of the company. So that's why I think, there may be some of those in, some of the smaller, not super enterprise, maybe not the Fortune 100, where you have massive marketing teams, but smaller teams. There's going to be kind of a convergence, I think, of those disciplines.
Yeah. So how do you think about attribution in this world, right? Because like historically in big company land, it's like, and I'm a performance guy, right? Like I'm a direct response guy as my background. I'm starting to become a brand convert and starting to believe in the ultimate power of brand as kind of like the ultimate growth hack. And that's like relatively recent over the last couple of years. Before, if we were talking about brand, I'd be like, get out of here. Like I'll buy some Google ads and I'll smoke you. But then, classically in these bigger orgs, it's like the brand team and the corporate comms team, all of their campaigns are for awareness, and they're doing billboards, they're sponsoring stadiums, they're in the airports with like out of home stuff. And they're not really expected not much anyway from like a measurement perspective or like an outcomes perspective. And then you go to the performance team or the direct response team, and it's like every single dollar has to be measured and accounted for. Right. So like, how do you think about attribution in this world where that's kind of merging together?
You said the A word. Attribution is such a mess. And the challenge is everyone tries to force it into kind of the last click, the last touch box. Everyone wants credit. And I think that's a problem. I think all the tools out there do a poor job. They do a poor job actually measuring what's happening in the marketplace. And these companies are making a lot of money doing that. Great. Happy for them. But here's my understanding, my kind of experience with attribution at its best came in anecdotally. Doesn't 20 years ago, when we were still trying to figure out the kind of offline online component. And at the time I was at what we would call essentially an affiliate marketer in the cable industry. And I was selling high-speed internet for Comcast, now Xfinity. And we would get market development funds from Comcast to help support the affiliate stuff that we were doing. And to give you a size of the scale of the operation, our business was doing about any quarter, we were doing about 10 to 15% of Comcast overall new subscribers. So I could sit down during one of Comcast or Xfinity's earnings calls and understand kind of where we fit within that and how we were influencing stuff. So what we found was that when Comcast wasn't running any of its brand work, the performance of our direct response and affiliate programs went down. But when they were running broadcast, our efficiency went up. And so there we saw in our numbers a direct correlation between kind of this top of the funnel kind of awareness building stuff and the bottom of the funnel conversion metrics that we were actually seeing and feeling. And I then went on to be a part of the University of Phoenix business model. That was the education side. And they actually brought somebody in to try and help them understand the correlation more directly between broadcast and direct. And they really couldn't. They kind of scrapped the whole thing. But coming out of that Comcast experience, the model that I like to use is this kind of managing to the blend. And what that essentially means is take every channel that has an influence on, or that you're running stuff and has an influence on me trying to sell my software to you, Chris. You're going to touch that at a bunch of different points. You're going to have a lot of different interactions. You're going to have, different levels of reach and frequency and the types of things that we're doing. Some of those channels are going to be much more efficient than others. But if I take one of those more efficient ones out or less efficient, then it's going to throw the metrics out of whack. And so what I've established with my CFO is we're managing to the blend. So what's that blended rate across all of those channels? And as long as those fundamentals stay in line with that blend, then we can continue to run and operate. But when things start to come out of whack, and yes, I'm managing the channels and looking at performance individually, but that attribution piece matters less because I'm looking at the holistic buyer's journey and pulling the levers within that to make sure that from a ROI standpoint, we're efficient across that blend. So yes, it's a bit of a punt on the question, but I think it's nobody does it well. So that's my workaround.
Yeah. I mean, managing to the blend, I like that concept. And I like the concept in general. So give folks some advice. People that are listening right now that, maybe they're not thinking of it like this. Maybe they still have that siloed piece, or maybe they're just doing all brand, and no direct response, or vice versa. What advice would you give them to get from where they are today to where they ought to be in your view?
I would start with, something that I hold near and dear to myself as well is it's that always learning mode or model. I like this quote from Charlie Munger: "Go to bed smarter than you woke up." And so continuing to learn and stretch yourself. And I think as marketers, the earlier in our career that we can understand how our organizations make money, whether you're B2C, B2B, or some combination of both. And then if you're the brand marketer, understand kind of how the stories that you're telling, how you're bringing your product or service to light in a form or fashion that resonates with your customer or prospect, and how, if you tell the story this way or tell the story that way, how is that stuff actually working? You're in the storytelling business, but at the end of the day, you're being paid for how well your stories perform. So if you're not doing the data yourself, befriend the data people and understand, you posted this article on this web page. How's that page performing? What kind of, how can it perform better? What kind of eyeballs? Where are they going next? And then kind of follow that path and understand, unpack that a little bit, because it may help inform the type and quality of the work that you're doing on the storytelling side. On the data or demand gen side, do the reverse. Befriend the people on the storytelling side, understand what they're doing to bring people in and what's working and what's not. And also do the same thing if you have a sales organization in your organization, in your company, what's resonating with their engagement, and how can you kind of share data with them and test and iterate some stuff on that. And so I think kind of cross the net on this is cross over some of those silos or barriers, because the more you're walking around virtually or otherwise in your organization, the more value you're bringing to your company, and the more vital you are to your organization today and onward. And if you're not, then you're going to be at the next place or in the next place and so on. So that's how you also have longevity.
Yeah. I like that. The more you're walking around, it's like,
Yeah. Insert yourself in those conversations. I mean, what do you typically see kind of, is in your business? Like how are people being successful on that end?
definitely a blended approach. So I'll tell you a story real quick. We not long ago we were working with this window company, regional here on the East Coast. They were mostly in Maryland, DC, Virginia, and we were running paid search for them. And our cost per conversion was whatever it was, and brand, of course, was less expensive than non-brand, and so on and so forth. And they're like, "Hey guys, we're like expanding. We want to stand up the Ohio market, I think it was." And we're like, "Okay, cool. Well, we have these search campaigns that are working just fine. Let's just basically clone them and run them in Ohio." So we did that, and we found the same thing that you saw. So like if the cost per lead in our home markets was like 100, in Ohio it was like 300. So eventually we were hitting our heads against the wall, because they were doing a lot of like TV, radio, direct mail type stuff in the home markets. So eventually we said, "Hey, let's start doing some of those more broadcasts and more brand style messaging." But also, of course, like everything that we did had an offer in it, right? And very quickly, like before, I think it was like over a period of 2 or 3 months, like the cost per conversions that we were seeing from the search channel basically normalized. So it doesn't need to take forever, I don't think, to create that brand awareness and affinity. And especially in this world where like, most of us and most of the listeners, like we're operating within like a niche market. It's not like you're, I mean, some folks, yeah, have broader markets like in the EDU space or in the, home services space where basically anybody with a home or anybody that wants a college degree is in market. But it doesn't necessarily need to take that long, I don't think, to build that brand awareness to get that.
No, no. And I think if you're trying to, even in some of those markets, if you're trying to bite off that big a group and say, everybody's our customer, or, I've even had organizations say, "Oh, we don't have any competitors." Like, okay, there are buckets within that. And I think the more you fine tune that, the better the message is, the better your story is, the better you're looking at your competitors. Like in the case of the company that didn't have any competitors, well, there's something that you're supplanting. It would be at the Excel spreadsheet or the green binder. Like they're using something.
But I think like one takeaway message that I would drop would be that we are now in the age of efficiency. Before it was just growth at all costs. Now everybody knows we're in efficiency. And oftentimes the first thing to get cut is the brand and the awareness type of spending, right? But I think that's a mistake. I think it's a mistake. It's going to be definitely hard to justify just pure brand and pure, awareness type spending, which is why I like the blending of the two. Like if we can make it so that every ad and every landing page and every, outgoing message has like some element of a cohesive story to it and is like memorable.
Well, and if you could map the flow from each of those, from, okay, you've got a podcast. Okay. Now your podcast is also promoting your newsletter. So now you're getting people that can really subscribe to your podcast now signing up for your newsletter. Now, what are you doing in your newsletter to then move people further along to now we've got this, piece of research. Now you're connecting the dots. So yes, you've got this brand stuff, this kind of fuzzy, thought leadership stuff over here. But there's a flow all the way through the customer journey where you're bringing people along and you've got metrics around that stuff. Do you have the one-to-one attribution and kind of, hey, this podcast listener bought their organization, bought on down the line. Okay, maybe it's a little fuzzy around that, but at least you've got some way of quantifying what you're doing and tying all the things together. And I think that may be one of the keys to being able to hold on to some of that brand stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that there's a lot of orgs that will wake up, one day. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be next month, but we'll wake up soon and be like, oh man, like we're really hitting the point of diminishing returns with these direct response efforts, and like, shit, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. And the sooner the marketers within those organizations can kind of continue to push and on that brand side of things, and whether overtly or covertly build that thought leadership stuff and that brand work, I think it's going to pay off, because starting from zero, it's going to be a long haul getting back.
Yeah. One other quick story. So for listeners who are in that mode where it's like, okay, look, I believe in brand, right? Just like the next guy, but my CFO is, just really harping on direct response and times are tight and so on and so forth. We ran a test recently with a client in the financial services space, which was a YouTube incrementality test. So they were doing ads all over the place, TV, broadcast. They operate in like 48 out of 50 states, and they spend millions of dollars a month across many, many different channels. And we were running very successfully Facebook ads, meta ads for them. And those programs were, super profitable, doing great. The problem was just like, how can we spend more? But then somebody got the idea of YouTube. They were like, let's try YouTube. So we're like, okay, cool. So we spun up some pretty thoughtful and like well-crafted YouTube campaigns. But what we saw in platform was like the cost per lead was like in the hundreds. It was like 100, 100, 120 type of thing. Whereas in Meta, it was like 30 or 40. We also saw, however, that the contact rate and lead quality in general was much better than it was from Facebook. But still, like, YouTube was overall less profitable on paper, right? But somebody had a thought, which was like, okay, yeah, I get that YouTube is less profitable, but like, isn't there some sort of halo effect or something? Because this is a really rich channel. Like, you're showing videos, you have the opportunity to storytell and things. So we did a geo holdout test where we basically took, a few markets that were consistent performers and ran YouTube only in those markets. And what we found was that it had a massive halo effect to the tune of like 3x. Like that $100 cost per lead that we were seeing was actually more like 30. And based on that, like their whole data science team was involved, and everybody got all excited. Google got involved, and they basically like tripled the budget and are still to this day just like raging on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, so here's the nugget that, as you were telling the story, that caused me to think that there was more. I mean, you were telling the story, so I knew there was more to it, but that you alluded to like the quality being better and some of the kind of downstream metrics. So on a cost per lead, things could be significantly out of whack, but the okay, you might not be getting as much volume through, but what is the close rate on those deals? What is the lifetime value of those deals? Are you delivering a higher caliber customer coming through? And there are some down funnel metrics that can help kind of justify or point to this halo, whether it's the halo effect or, if we're doing ads on Reddit versus Google versus Facebook, like, Reddit might be out of whack, but, and the top line metrics, but some of those average contract value and some of those other things more than justify, um, the expense for those, more expensive or finely tuned channels. I'm glad you saw that for your client on the YouTube. So that's a great story.
Everything down funnel was like night and day, like so much higher quality.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway for that, and I've seen it in a couple other categories, is don't just stop at that top line metric. Like understand, like dig deeper, because there might be something in the data that you're doing that might say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe fine tuning this, doing something a little bit different can justify, spending more time and energy on YouTube, and then ultimately unlocking this massive, channel and this massive opportunity. Also now wonder, in that YouTube scenario, did it have some benefit on some of your Facebook and other channel performance because you've had this halo as well? So it kind of raised all ships.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about its effect on Facebook, actually. I probably should, but it definitely had a positive impact on search, which was like their biggest spender, particularly on brand search. I mean, the brand search volume, like you could just see it basically rising with the YouTube spend scaling.
And this for everyone kind of following along in our conversation, these fundamentals work, whether it's B2C, B2B, or B2C to B, or B2B to C, kind of forwards and backwards. So, between Chris and I think we've covered a lot of different verticals and categories and have seen this work a number of different ways. So,
dude, we are getting geeky. I like it. One last question on brand gen, which I love that term. And then I want to talk about Ceipal a little bit. But so with brand gen, so like let's say I'm in a scenario where, I'm running mostly bottom of funnel stuff. It's like a product focused ad. Say it's a LinkedIn ad for the B2B, product focused, like, hey, we're the best. Here's our better features. Here's some of our benefits, like book a demo. Or if it's like even a mid funnel thing where it's like, hey, we just did this study on SOC 2 compliance and like, here's the top 5 takeaways, download our white paper, whatever. So like your standard run of the mill ad like that, how do you infuse some degree of like storytelling into that? Like in a world where it's like, 600 character count limit and, there's only so much you can like squeeze onto the image ad. You could do a video, I'm sure, but like forget about the character count limit. Like how do you infuse story into a typical ad like that?
Who does that really, really well? The Gong.io does a phenomenal job of, I like what they do from a brand standpoint. Like there's continuity in terms of them. They're not necessarily telling stories throughout, but in terms of look and feel and stuff, it's not matching luggage and what they're doing from a brand standpoint, but what Gong ad when you see it. But down into the demand gen stuff, they've found a way to tell little stories with their data. And so it's not like, hey, download this little bit, this white paper or whatever. Like, hey, we created this really cool thing. No, they'll take extracts from it and it will be like, a word cloud of the 10 words that help close a sale. Download our cheat sheet. Or this is the point of the conversation with a C-suite where, where a sale happens or where it doesn't. And the longer you talk, the less likely you are to get a sale. And so their social ad on LinkedIn has this line graph showing that. And you're like, oh my goodness, not only did I get a piece of information, but I want to find out what else Gong has about this, whether I'm a customer or not. And so now I'm downloading that study or that information. And I'm engaging with their brand and stuff. And they've figured this out in a very finely tuned way to be able to kind of spin up these data case driven stories at that end of the funnel and do it in a way that's true to their brand, product differentiating, and it's engaging. And here I am talking about it, and I'm not even a Gong customer.
I am a Gone customer, and they're a great marketing org. And their CMO actually was one of the first guests on the pod, Udi. Well, I don't think he's a CMO anymore. I think he's like chief evangelist or something. But Udi Ledergor, he's a badass, dude. He is a badass. Okay, cool. So you would consider that to be brand storytelling. I would consider that to be like almost more in the education or category. It's like, let's educate on a piece of data. So maybe I misunderstood.
Well, okay, so I think there's an opportunity in at every touch point to do storytelling. So like, if you're hopping off of this our recording session and working on a PowerPoint deck, there's an opportunity to tell a story in there and using the headlines of your slides to tell that story thread, and that the body of your slide is the data that supports it. But I should be able to flip through your slide deck and just read the headlines and know what the story is. And so that's another opportunity. And so I think that's that's one of the biggest challenges from a marketing standpoint, is like we tend to put the brand storytelling in this box where it's the pretty pictures and it's the big budgets and it's the high production values. No, I think there's an opportunity at every turn. And so when you were asking me the question about, advice for other folks on how to grow and expand, that's where that cross-pollination comes in, because now the data people are talking to the storytellers, and they're learning how to not just put up charts and stuff, but what's the story behind it. And the storytellers are learning, hey, here's how the content that I'm creating is performing. Oh, it's not doing exactly what I thought, but it was a really good piece. Like I liked the language in there, but it's not getting the return that I want. So that's what I see as some of the brilliance of what Gong has put together is they find a way at every turn to infuse their stuff with that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So I like that. So brand gen, like the brand part of brand gen is not necessarily saying, hey, I'm Gong and, we were founded by salespeople and, we found this problem and here's our brand story. It's not really like that. What you're saying is essentially like, hey, it could be, let me pull an extract from that white paper, educate you on that, right? So you start associating me with like, hey, Gong is for, a great resource for salespeople. And then later on, maybe you'll tell like the actual like brand origination story.
They all kind of work together in that you have to have your brand origin story in order to at the point of the data extract to be true to your brand. So like in the Ceipal world, our platform came out of, so it's a talent and staffing kind of management software. And our origin story, our founder had a staffing company, and he needed software like ours. And he said, I could buy this, or you know what? All that stuff's expensive and it doesn't do everything that I think it should. So I'm going to go build my own. And he spun up Ceipal.
That's always a great story.
But it gives us the license to say that, it's not in our outward marketing, but we are staffing software built by staffing people. And so as we talk about, or as we communicate what we're doing at whether it's the data piece, it gives us license to say, this is important. And we understand that this is important to you as a staffing organization, because we also use this kind of data to help grow our staffing business, or our founder does. And Gong, I think, does it in the same way. They use some of that same data to close their sales. And that's part of their origin story. And so you get the honesty and the integrity coming through. Whereas if, taking it out of category, let's say Samsung started talking in the mobile phone space. Let's say Samsung started talking about design and stuff rather than speeds and feeds, and they tried to take a play out of the Apple playbook. Um, Everyone would be like, no, that's not authentic to what Samsung is. And that's kind of an extreme example. And if Apple did the same thing, they do it in a fashion where the megapixels and the zoom rates and things of their devices and pieces are part of or informed by the design and the simplicity of their function. Uh, and so you believe it.
Totally. Well, a couple of good excerpts that I found quite valuable was like most any business has data, like internal in-house data, and similar to the way that Gong uses that, to create their premium content, and then they lead with that in their ads. Like that's a form of storytelling.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
Find yours and put your own spin on it. Like I was having a conversation with one of my product guys today about, where can we find that? Where do we have that in this particular product, and what stories can we tell coming out of that? But go find that first, and then marketing will figure out the story for it.
Yeah, brilliant. Time is flying. I want to talk about Ceipal a little bit. You've started already, but I want people to hear about it because it's really cool. So with Ceipal, tell us a little bit about it. What's the hook, or what kind of makes you guys different and desirable? And then also just like what's really working well from a marketing standpoint for you, like what's really moving the needle for you?
Well, So we are, as I said, talent software. So we kind of play across a bunch of different product lines. We have an applicant tracking software. So like when you submit your resume, it goes into an applicant tracking system, whether you're dealing with a company or a recruiting firm. Like it's the software that consumes that and does the matching between roles and candidates and stuff. So we have a platform that does that. We have a vendor management platform that works together with the ATS, but it's like if you have contract workers and freelancers and stuff that you're kind of bringing in or outsourcing some things, how do you manage those groups of people? And then we have a workforce platform that ties all of that stuff together as well. So we kind of go across the line there from a product standpoint. As I mentioned earlier, all of that kind of grew out of our experience in the staffing space. And when I came on board, we were only in the general staffing and IT verticals. We recently, in 2024, launched in the healthcare space, and continuing to grow around that side of things. But what kind of makes us continue to be unique in our space is even though we're bringing AI in, we still believe that recruiting and staffing at its core is a human business. We deal in talent and in people, and our customers deal in people. And so it's all about the relationships. And so our technology and any AI that we infuse into our platforms needs to be human powered or people driven. And so that's part of our new tagline and ethos. And, but I think, the stuff that's working well for us, we've done really well at the bottom end of the funnel. And we've grown a lot because of that. And, earlier you and I were talking about kind of those organizations that are going to wake up one day and figure out that, the bottom end of the funnel isn't working anymore because you haven't invested in the top. We're rapidly transitioning into that top end of stuff because as I look at our data, and with our CFO and our board, like we're seeing that, that happen. Our sales cycles are getting longer and we're seeing some of the early indications that, hey, we need to be investing earlier in the process. We can't just feed off the bottom end of stuff. So we're starting to do more of that. And there are little nuggets that I've shared in our conversation about how we're going about that or how I'm thinking about a lot of that stuff. But it's, I think there's a lot of things in kind of the marketing space where we all seem to think, or we all pretend that we have the answers. And the reality is we don't. And we need to try a lot of different things. And, I've learned a lot from you and our conversations and kind of, have been inspired and thinking about some things in a couple different ways. And same thing with the conversations I've been having with other folks. And I think that's going to be our key to success kind of going forward is we're trying a bunch of stuff, seeing what sticks. Your YouTube example, hey, we need to take a look at some of the things that we're doing and drill deeper into some of the bottom line numbers. But see if there's a thread there that we can turn this into a great, a great channel or a great story for us. So that's kind of the Ceipal story in a nutshell.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And I've been inspired and learned a lot from you as well. And one of the things that I like best is that like a lot of guests come on this show sometimes and they're like, yeah, like everything's great. As a follow-up question, I almost always ask about challenges, right? You've already kind of like alluded to that. But usually when I ask about challenges, people are like, oh yeah, it's all wine and roses, like macroeconomics are a little rough, but like that's about it. But like, I really like that you're open and candid about that. And I think that the audience, and the listeners will probably appreciate that too.
Well, it's the honest side of things. And I find even with my team, like the more straightforward we are, the more transparent we are, the better work we get out of each of us. And, it may change the box that we play in. But some cool stuff coming out of that. So
I dig that. So looking forward or even like, the recent present, like what is it that you guys are trying or like, what are some investments that you're planning on making or kind of like what's on the roadmap?
Well, so we alluded to it earlier in my kind of how do you tie the dots between some of that brand stuff. In 2024, we launched a podcast, and we're evolving into season 2 and doing some stuff there as well as a newsletter. And so that's kind of part of our thread and our one of the things that we're putting forward, from a brand and a thought leadership standpoint to really get our name out there. Because there's a lot of green field in that, in our category, I think, an opportunity for us to do some stuff there. And we still rely heavily on paid ads and events. And I think those will continue to play an important role, but we're thinking about, how we utilize those, and maybe doing some things in some different ways and kind of, exploring some other opportunities kind of that spin off of those things. And then also, how do we get smarter? If we brought somebody into our website, into our process, how do we maximize, our engagement with them? You might not be ready to buy now, but how do we continue to stay in front of you? We've already spent $1 to get you in. Let's stay in front of you. You raised your hand that there's some level of interest. Maybe not today, but maybe tomorrow. Maybe and so what does that communication thread look like? And how do we create more of a relationship with you? And that involves, what are you looking for? And making sure that we're delivering on that. So whether it's content, whether it's solutions, whether it's demos, whether it's, and so we're lifting the hood on a lot of different things.
That's brilliant, man. And I think you're onto something with podcasts and newsletters. Newsletters particularly, I think are like really high leverage just because, it's really inexpensive to acquire a subscriber to a newsletter. Like to give you a sense, we get newsletter subscribers for like $2 or $3 a pop in a good month. And it's just like a very simple, ad flow. Like I think we have like a short video ad that's like, hey, this newsletter like helps marketers get ahead in their career and like go. And it's just a super simple landing page, like 0 scrolls, it's just like one simple email only. And it's like, $3 for a subscriber versus, to get a white paper download might be like $100 to get like a meeting request or like a demo request is like $500, $3,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like the thing with, your CTA metrics, and kind of your delivery metrics are triggered a thought in my head. Cause one of the things that I inherited was our website is all about get a demo, get a demo, get a demo, get a demo. And not everyone's ready for a demo. And so what can we do in advance of that? And so that's where the podcast and newsletter come in. And there's a bunch of other stuff that we're testing and trying that are having positive effects. And so now how do we continue to roll that out and create more opportunities for engagement even if you're not ready for that demo?
Yeah. It amazes me how many B2B SaaS companies are like all about get the demo, like to the detriment of other, CTAs. I personally think that the goal should always be to capture an email address or a phone number. It would be even better yet, like a SMS mobile number. But yeah, I think that's a really smart, way to go about it, because think about this, suppose that your rate of conversion for get a demo is probably like 1 or 2%, right? So for every 1,000 visitors that you're getting, you're getting maybe 10 or 20 of those. The rate of email download. So for instance, like if you had like a takeover sort of modal that had a really well articulated offer, like why you should sign up for the newsletter or why you should sign up for the podcast or whatever, and you were trying to get an email address, you would probably get another 1 or 2% conversion rate, it would not really cannibalize the other one. Right. So it's like you can get double the number of email addresses, and email addresses are basically like digital gold,
Yeah. You own it.
And SMS is even better. I think we're going to start seeing more B2Bs be like, forget about your email. Like, let me get your phone number and I'll just text you this thing.
Yeah. No, I think you're onto something there.
Cool, man. Well, I've really enjoyed this. I actually, honestly have been inspired and motivated, and I learned some things. For everybody that's listening, if you have been inspired or motivated or learned anything, or even just liked it, drop us a comment, drop us a like, forward it over to a friend, pay it forward. They will probably appreciate it too. And we always enjoy, comments wherever you pick up your pods. But I think that's a wrap, man. For folks that would like to learn more about you or Ceipal, where would you direct them?
Hit me up on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Andy Weiss at Ceipal. Yep.
Andy Weiss at Ceipal. Love that. All right. Well, stay on the line just 1 second. We'll wrap up. But for everybody else, that was another awesome episode of Revenue Driven CMO, and we will see you next time.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at revenuedrivencmo.com. That's revenuedrivencmo.com.